to a lush delta, and there they founded the glorious city of Keshanar. Here, Ra-Memnon made a deal with the gods, offering allegiance in exchange for divine magic and immortality for the Pharaohs of Keshanar. Each pharaoh is only chosen by the Phoenix, from among the most worthy Keshite citizens. This is the Phoenix Covenant. Powerful forces preserve it, but some seek its destruction. Set is in timeout in Duat, the underworld, as punishment for killing his brother Osiris. He is tasked with keeping the forces of Apep at bay, but Set tires of his confinement. And his agents are always at work. By the way, I'm Mop-Hotep, a humble sanitation dusker here in Keshanar. Somehow my soul got trapped in my skeletal body. Mind you, keeping Keshanar clean is a pretty cool job. I mean, look at the place! Flying obelisk act out the lazy dreams of dead pharaohs, the temples, the monuments, the bathhouses, oh, and the highly efficient sewer system. Just dump your refuse in the nearest troll hole, and the sewer creatures of the downtown will consume it for you. This place rocks! The scribes of Orthane have provided you with new spells, monsters, species, subclasses, and magic items to support your quest. The architects and builders of Taha created the entire city of Keshanar in 3D in the Unreal Engine. 25 million square feet of city, with hundreds of unique buildings for players to explore out of game, and for DMs to show the players where they are in the city. Need a last-minute battle map? Just push a button to strip off the top of the buildings and export a VTT-ready image, complete with the grid. You can even adjust the lighting. Come to the kingdom of Keshanar, where ancient Egypt comes alive.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us. This is your third Keshanar Kickstarter livestream. I'm Brooke Belk. I'll be moderating our conversation today. I'm lucky enough to get to work with Dave here and Dr. Jill as Keshanar's resident marketing maven. This is, of course, Dave Haddon, our founder, and the illustrious Dr. Jill Waller, who we're lucky enough to have on staff as our Egyptologist. So we'll be talking today about Egyptian lore versus Keshanar lore, fact and fiction versus fantasy. Real quick, before we get started, we're going to be making a special announcement later in the live stream. We'll be about 45 minutes here, take a little break, make an announcement in the middle. Stay tuned for that. Also, our previous live stream was on shipping questions and tier questions. We have links to that in the comment section. Make sure to check that out if you have questions, or email us at any time. Okay, let's get to it. So Dave, do you want to just intro yourself in a couple sentences, and then we'll move to Dr. Jill?
Hey everybody, I'm Dave Haddon. I'm the creator of the Kingdom of Keshanar, founder of Orthane Productions, and thank you all for showing up. We love engaging with our community, and your support has been incredible, and I'm really looking forward to this stream and having Dr. Waller here to answer all of your questions and geek out on like Egyptology and how it's been, you know, so inspiring to the development of Keshanar.
Absolutely. Dr. Jill, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Jill Waller. I have a PhD in Egyptology, and luckily I managed to get a job working on this game where I get to provide the writers and artists with inspiration with facts from ancient Egypt.
So you get to be, of all things, in the gaming industry these days. That sounds like a fun, hard write. So we're just going to dive in with some subject matter that is Keshanar fantasy versus Egypt, actual real live lore. So we're going to talk about today the gods, the monsters, and the magic. Let's start with something about the magic. So we'll start with Dave. So Dave, lines of succession in Keshanar with the Pharaohs. So we have some magic involved in that, divine magic within the Keshanar system. Can you explain that a little bit?
Right. So Yeah, so like in ancient Egypt, I think Jill, right? Most of the succession happened mostly genetically. Like, so the children of the pharaohs would, for the most part, we'll let you address that directly. So in Keshanar, because the power of divine magic was granted from the gods to the wrath to the people, um, and it was a contract that they negotiated, together. The gods wanted the Phoenix Covenant, that contract, to be persistent, and so they insisted that it couldn't just be like your lineage, so that your children, because it's kind of just a matter of time before one pharaoh's children is like a couple of sandwiches short of a picnic, and everything, the wheels come off the wagon. So they basically, and they also thought that the gods, it's hard to get the gods to agree on anything also, so they have this concept of the phoenix, which is inspired from the Bennu bird. This is where we're really diverging, from the Egyptology lore, of course, that appears at the death of the pharaoh, actually like a few weeks before the pharaoh dies, to kind of signify that, hey, you better get your affairs in order because it's coming. And then when the pharaoh dies, the phoenix also emblazons into ash, and then the spirit of the phoenix guides the pharaoh into the afterlife, and into the pharaoh's final test to ensure that they haven't been corrupted by all that wealth and power, and that they're actually worthy to ascend to Eru, the Egyptian heaven, the field of reeds, and then the phoenix rises from its own ashes, and it chooses the most worthy person in the empire to be the next pharaoh. So that's how it happens in Keshanar, and so because fundamentally we've adopted like as much culture and lore, technology, art, architecture, all of those concepts of theology, to become the basis of what Keshanar is, but because the magic is, we've imbued it with Dungeons and Dragons style magic, right? So in TTRPG magic, and so then that influences how everything works from that point forward, and so from that point forward, it's kind of an extrapolation. So you have some thoughts, Jill, about that,
Yeah,
in terms
thanks,
of how how does that differ from succession in real with pharaohs in ancient Egypt? Obviously, very different, but
Yes, very different. If all went to plan, then, as you mentioned, the next king would likely be the crown prince, the son of the current king, who would then take over. In order to ensure that, there were even periods when there would have been a co-regency, where an older king would have adopted, taken his son as king at the same time, so that it's much easier for it to transition. Um, but there are definitely cases, obviously, where, somebody took power or somebody came to the throne who wasn't expected. And those were ones where we tend to get more texts that kind of try to justify them being king. So, like, for example, Hatshepsut, who was a woman and, took the power for herself, she actually has this text in her temple where she claims to have been the child of the god Amun, and even like has a whole thing about the divine conception where he impregnated her mother and she was always meant to be king. There's another famous example would be Thutmose the Fourth, where he claims that he took a nap underneath the Sphinx, which at that point was already, well over 1,000 years old. And the god of the Sphinx told him he would become king if he cleared all the sand away from the Sphinx. So he did, and he became king. So again, kind of chosen by the god. In the case of Thutmose the Fourth, he was a prince, but he doesn't seem to have been next in line, and what happened to next in line seems to be a little up in the air. So again, had to
Yeah.
justify it a little bit.
yeah, and
So
there's also the concept in Keshanar of like the favored or the elder offspring of the current pharaoh is called the Hope, and it's like a title. And so the idea is that they kind of hope the phoenix picks them, and occasionally that is the case, but not necessarily.
So, yeah, this brings up a good question, both of you. Just stepping back for a second. So, you're both talking about divine magic, right? So we've got that going on in the fact and the fantasy. Dr. Jill, can you tell me a little, in contrast to what Dave was talking about the phoenix, this force of divine magic? Can you tell me a little in general about divine magic as it played out in Egyptians' lives, in the culture? If how important it was as a notion within Egyptian culture.
So magic in ancient Egyptian culture isn't what we think of magic as today. In fact, actually, there's a lot of scholarly debate on whether we should even call it magic because it brings up modern Western connotations of like anti-religion stuff, which is not the case. Magic, religion, even the sciences were all one thing in ancient Egypt. So, for example, like medicine in ancient Egypt had elements of all three. You would use, there would be magic involved in a lot of medicinal cures, but also real medicinal cures that we know today scientifically do work. And also, they would also, as part of those cures, invoke gods and even tell stories of similar things that had happened to gods as a way of magically trying to cure things. So they all kind of worked together. And magic was considered to be a force from the gods, which then could be used for good or bad. It wasn't good or bad in itself, it was neutral. And it was personified as the god Heka, which meant magic.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Yes.
Thanks, Dr. Jill.
Yeah, and I think that also, like, well, first of all, the ancient Egyptians invented observational medicine, which is huge. I mean, I'm always waxing on about all the amazing things that the ancient Egyptians invented that we often attribute to other cultures or don't even realize the profound impact they have on our society even to this day. But in Keshanar, there's just like in 5e, there's this differentiation between divine and arcane magic. Arcane magic being sort of unraveling the fundamental forces of the weave and the power underlying all things in the universe and harnessing that to create spells and to make magic happen. And divine magic being this sort of proprietary magic that is only available to the gods, which you can beseech them, and align yourself with those gods and beseech them, and then they will bestow it upon you. And so that is a really important differentiation in terms of all of the Keshanar lore because that's what the gods have to trade. So what the gods have to trade in the Phoenix Covenant to get the people to come and be aligned with the gods is that they will provide them with divine magic, and which gives them power over life and death. Because the divine magic is the only one that does that. A 20th level wizard can die of a paper cut, without divine magic, right? So the power of healing, power of life over death, super powerful. The power to morph, to turn a rock into stone, which is really handy when you're building giant monuments, that kind of thing.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. So I want to move to monsters real quick. So we have, obviously, D&D, got a lot of monsters in Keshanar. I want to move to examples of monsters that are Keshan only versus examples of monsters that were lifted from ancient Egypt. And the differences maybe between how they're portrayed in Keshanar if they were lifted from ancient Egypt. So for instance, Dave, the sand dragon, Egyptian or fantasy?
Fantasy, although, and Jill, you can correct me on this, but it seems like Apep was potentially a kind of, and also there's winged serpents, a sort of very primordial sort of dragon concept that could have fed into the concept of modern dragons. Do you have an opinion about that?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, actually, like modern ideas of dragons obviously like went through many lenses, but even like the original Greek word drakon basically more meant snake, and Apep was a giant snake.
Yep.
So yes, images like Apep probably inspired then like medieval versions of dragons. Dragons themselves though were more like from China and Europe, but the idea of giant snake monster is definitely Egyptian and has to do a lot with Egyptian culture.
And many of them are winged.
I mean, some of them especially guardian demons in the afterlife. Some of them are, and some of them even have leads. There's a god Nehebu-Kau who is kind of like a mix between a snake and a human, and can sometimes just have leads. Sometimes is just a snake head on a human body. It's a little weird.
Yeah.
So the obvious takeaways are mummies, right? And although the mummies in sort of 5e lore are more sort of the diseased and rotten kind, that are always evil, and that isn't the case necessarily in Keshanar. There's lots of different kinds of mummies. Not all of them are the diseased, rotten monsters that you meet in dungeon crawls. We have lots of different ones that are more kind of in keeping with the true spirit of what mummification was all about in ancient Egypt, which is preservation of the body as a vessel for the afterlife. Um, and then that we extrapolated into all kinds of interesting things as a result of that. Um, One that I actually just kind of really realized in our December discovery tour in Egypt was it again Queen Hatshepsut's temple, Jill, which you just mentioned, mortuary temple, and there are gargoyles, that are water spouts for the drains for the roof that are lion shaped, and they're there and as guardian spirits, which is kind of what gargoyles are for in like Gothic gargoyles. Except that they're more designed to scare away the evil spirits and it's to protect from them. So really, gargoyles trace back to ancient Egypt too. The first kind of appearance of them, and of course sphinxes, right? So, and there's lots of different kinds of sphinx in ancient Egyptian lore. Like I'll pronounce these wrong. The Creole Sphinx, and I think there's a couple of different ones. And Lamia potentially there's sort of a little bit of overlap there, but probably not directly. That's probably more Mesopotamian. And then so those are the ones that everybody's aware of. And then Jill, mention your favorite one, the Shakak, the headache demon.
Sehekek?
Yes,
Oh,
there you
yeah.
go. I always pronounce that wrong.
Yeah, Sehekek is just one of those various demons. There's a lot of different demons which can inflict people with various things on Earth, different diseases, bad dreams even can come from demons. But yes, Sehekek is one that particularly causes headaches. And so we have, again, with that whole magic and medicine and religion all kind of wound up into one, we have spells to, dispel Seheket to help heal somebody and get their headache to go away.
Thanks, Dr. Jill. So, if you've just joined us, we're talking with Dr. Jill Waller, Keshanar's resident Egyptologist, and Dave Haddon, our founder, about differences between Egypt fact and Keshan fiction. So, Dave, I was interested in you're talking about gargoyles just now. So, can you tell the audience a little bit about did you directly lift gargoyles? Are they in Keshanar and you lifted them from ancient culture? And then maybe Jill can tell us a little bit more about how they were used in Egypt.
But gargoyles are already in the monster manual, right? They're already a 5e creature.
Yeah. Did you change them for Keshanar at all?
Not yet, but we're still working on some of the monsters actually, and we're still drawing inspiration from I don't know, 1,000 or so. There's so many demons and monsters, and most of them are in the underworld, but there's some really cool ones like the Eater of Shadows, and the what is it, Hiu fiends that attack the souls of the dead, and just so many, right? And a lot of them are also very chimera-like in that they mix animal parts with human parts, and so there's just so much stuff that we're going to be able to draw from there. I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
You did. Thank you. Yeah, and then I'll punt it back to Dr. Jill. So, Dr. Jill, ancient Egypt fact. Can you tell us a couple of things about gargoyles in ancient Egypt?
Yeah. So, I mean, gargoyles were definitely a thing in ancient Egypt in that way that they had water spouts attached to roofs to catch runoff, which, a lot of people don't expect because Egypt doesn't get a lot of rain, but we did have them as early as the 5th dynasty with the Temple of Niuserre. Some of them are just plain spouts, but most of them are lion-shaped. And actually, unlike Western gargoyles, the water doesn't come out of their mouth, but between their paws. And with that, there are two main theories about what they were doing. One is that they were trying to protect and dispel, especially evil gods who caused rain, like Set, Chaos God, kind of trying to keep him at bay. Another one is that it's actually related to different stories from like the pyramid texts of the creation of Shu and Tefnut with like the water coming out. But possibly even a bit of both. So,
gotcha. Awesome.
And by the way, anybody on the stream, if you have questions about your favorite Egyptian gods, how they're interpreted in Keshanar, or absolutely anything about ancient Egypt, please Ask away.
Ask away. We'll get to the answers. And speaking of gods, Dave, maybe we do one more bit, maybe on the gods, and take some audience questions. Yeah. So I'm personally curious about the utilization of Ra as we understand that and change it in Keshanar versus in ancient Egypt itself, right? So obviously, in both, right? Can you talk a little bit about Ra and Ra Memnon and that storyline in Keshanar?
Yeah, I mean, we don't change the gods much. There are departures, and one of the things that we're doing is Dr. Waller's going through the entire manuscript, and she's pointing out the differences where we do make departures, um, basically for purposes of gameplay and to make it gameable and to make it fun, and like, so we're trying to. We don't want this whole thing to be a history lesson, right? We want it to be a really amazing adventure that you guys create, together with your GM to, to define the Keshanar that you want it to be and its future. And you're going to have so much, autonomy in that as you go along, as your characters level up and get more powerful and more influential in the kingdom. But the gods, I think that we were pretty faithful to the Egyptian canon in terms of most things. Even a lot of the history, so like Set killing his brother Osiris and cutting his body into pieces and throwing it into the river. This is not an historical role play, so Keshanar is not ancient Egypt. It's like it's a parallel universe where that takes, like I said, all those aspects of ancient Egypt art and culture and theology and everything, and then adds the 5e stuff like the magic and the monsters. If they were all real, then how does it sort of progress over a similar timeline but different events? But it starts out with like a lot of the early lore like being the same. So Set kills his brother Osiris, cuts his body into pieces. Osiris is sort of the dead god now and the god of the underworld. But then, their versions that we make there is then Set is basically punished by Ra and the gods by being confined to Duat to fight a kind of endless battle against the forces of Apep and the forces of chaos and destruction, Apep being the great worm of destruction. So that's a bit of a departure. And so there's little things like that are more sort of temporal departures as it moves along. But I think, for the most part, like the gods are pretty pretty accurate to the lore. Like Sekhmet, one of my favorites, right? Is she's the goddess of healing and also destruction and pestilence. So and a lot of that is just like the Egyptians have this affinity for balance, right? Ma'at. The great cosmic balance, and so like everything's sort of balanced. I think that one thing that we had to here's the thing that we departed from is there isn't like none of the gods necessarily are a god of a thing, but that's really helpful in TTRPG for the god to be like a god of a couple of things and not just a big personality. And so we had to sort of make some of those decisions a little bit where it wasn't immediately obvious what the thing should be. So that, like, for instance, making Isis the goddess of magic, she did use a lot of magic, but really like Heka, right, Jill? It was the actual ancient Egyptian god of magic. And so and there's so many gods, so we couldn't do them all. We couldn't put them all in, especially not in the beginning here. The book would be 6 inches thick. So we picked like something like 33 gods, I think, that are pretty the ones that really we think create a really frothy pantheon. To give lots of player choices, in terms of their affiliation, and keep things interesting. Plus, we had to build a temple for all of them in the Unreal City, the 3D Unreal City, which is a big deal. It's a lot of work, and so we can only do so many of those. And actually, 30 is a lot. They all had to have their own designs with an architect, and then they had to be built in Blender and placed in the city and everything. So that's another thing. It's like, so in the book, you'll see that all the gods have like. They have like we try to boil down the lore, but then also gamify it. So that's where you'll see we'll start to make departures from some of the actual canon.
So, Dr.
Yeah,
Jill,
and
Dave
in that point,
just mentioned. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as that point, as you mentioned, I am pointing out in my commentary what's different too.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you'll get a setting book, and you'll also get a set of expert commentary on Egypt. So one thing, Dave, that you just mentioned, Sekhmet in specific, right? So when I was first reading and how we had utilized Sekhmet and Keshanar, I was fascinated. Dr. Jill, can you tell us a little bit about Sekhmet in ancient Egypt? Give us just a little taste of the contrast, if there is one, or a comparison between how we've used her and how Sekhmet exists in ancient Egypt.
So Sekhmet is actually one of the gods who is most similar, probably, in Keshanar
Awesome.
to ancient Egypt, because she is one of the gods that really that duality is kind of focused on in Keshanar. Most gods in ancient Egypt did have multiple sides and that sort of thing, because in essence, a lot of them were embodiments of a concept rather than, god of whatever. But like Dave was saying with the idea of balance and Ma'at, anything that a god could cause, they could also stop. So that's why with Sekhmet, she is goddess of war and plague, but because she's goddess of plague, she's also goddess of healing because she can then heal any plague. She
Oh, that's
can,
interesting.
yeah, she can both, create and end it. So with Sekhmet too, she is very much a goddess of destruction, but she has also more passive, nicer sides, although those are usually personified as other goddesses, which is something that we don't really get in Keshanar. So in ancient Egypt, often different gods and goddesses were different aspects of one another, and kind of, um, it was a lot more fluid.
Hmm.
So especially like Sekhmet was one of the goddesses who could be the Eye of Ra, um, meaning that she was one of the goddesses who can act both in various feminine aspects towards the god Ra, consort, daughter, mother,
Hmm.
and she was also a protector and defender of the god Ra. Now, other goddesses who take on this role include Hathor, Bastet, Mut. They all can take on this role, and as such, they're also all fluid and kind of can take on different aspects of one another. So, for example, in a myth where Sekhmet might take on the more destructive aspect, then Hathor might be represented as the same goddess, but the feminine aspects of that goddess.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
and in Keshanar, Sekhmet is that temple is in charge of the Lion Legion, which is the basically the standing army of the Pharaoh for defense of the empire. So
Okay.
that's where that kind of defense concept, expresses there.
Cool. Thanks, both of you. So I'm going to move to a couple of audience questions. Thanks for your engagement, y'all. We
Yeah.
appreciate it. So I've got one here. I'm going to read it out loud. We've got it from Roberto. I've been running an Atenist Paladin for a long time. I love that era of ancient Egypt. Did you put anything from that era into the game? So maybe, Dr. Jill, you can explain what the Atenist era is, and then we'll talk about it if it's within the game.
Yeah, so by Otnus, probably referring to the Amarna period where,
Hotness. There we go.
yeah,
Awesome.
um, where Akhenaten made Aten kind of the main god. Now, one thing also with that, it's often referred to as monotheism and compared to like modern monotheistic religions. It wasn't quite that. It was more monolatry, where the Aten was raised above other gods, and actually then Akhenaten and his family, especially his wife Nefertiti, were, even though the king was already kind of this higher person than everybody else, he made it even more so, so that the Aten was only ever shown shining on him and his family, and then everybody else was kind of off to the side. Um,
Okay.
but with that, as Akhenaten's reign went on, he did start making it so that other gods were not acceptable, mainly the bigger state gods like Amun. Other gods seem to still be fine. Ra definitely still seems to be fine since Ra and Aten are kind of, one and the same. They're both sun. But as time went on, if Akhenaten had ruled for more than 17 years, who knows? It might have been a monotheistic. To my knowledge, I don't know that we're bringing much of that into Keshanar, although maybe Dave can talk about that.
Yeah. What do you think, Dave?
As far as monotheism, not or the other word I can never remember. What is it, Jill?
Monolatry.
Monolatry.
Idolatry. There we go.
That sounds like a weird marital structure. Yeah, not really. There is something I can't talk about that's deep into the future of the lore that sort of kind of hints at that a little.
With Keshan secrets, Dave?
Oh yeah,
Oh.
well, of course, yeah. We've got the whole,
Okay.
and one of the first things we had to do is we had to figure out the big plot line, which isn't necessarily how the game's going to go for you because that's going to be based on player decisions. But what's the background lore behind everything, which we call the Ordatu. So or for Orthane, Duat, Aru, right? And yeah, so there's some interesting things that basically conspiracies are real, and everything isn't always as it seems, and there's a lot of surprises and twists and turns that you'll encounter, mind-blowing coincidences, that kind of thing, as the game progresses. 3 books, right? So the first one's levels 1 through 10, 3 campaign books, a setting book, and then first campaign book, which is levels 1 to 10, is in this Kickstarter, and then in quick succession, so that no one's waiting for it, because that would be the kiss of death, right? You got to keep the campaign going. Oh, we'll release the next 2. Honestly, the setting was the most difficult piece of this whole thing. That was vast amount of work to write that. I've been working on it for decades, but I've been playtesting it pretty seriously for about 15 years and writing hard for 4. And in the last year with a really big team. So, and people doing it full time. So and that's finished, which is good. So like when the Kickstarter ends, we're actually over 50% through the work required to deliver it. So we have a very aggressive delivery schedule, which we're committed to trying to meet.
So, well, Dave, this is one for you then. So, speaking of delivery of the setting book, so in the setting book or the campaign, Dr. Jill mentioned the Eye of Ra earlier in an answer. This question from Caroline Murphy: did you bring the concept of the Eye of Ra into Keshanar? And Caroline likes the Hathor Sekhmet story, which Dr. Jill, I believe you just referenced. So did we bring stories like that, or the concept of the Eye of Ra, into Keshanar?
Yeah, and the Eye of Horus, they're definitely integrated in terms of arcane, legendary magic items, that kind of thing. It isn't something you'll encounter in a whole lot in the first campaign book, but I think that later on, more of those kind of giant, super powerful features of gods and magic-fied, gamified, will be coming into play more heavily.
Awesome.
Yeah, but to answer from what I've seen, I don't think a lot of that story is in there, nor is the Wandering Goddess. But maybe as we continue to,
not yet.
Yeah, because I did tell Dave about that earlier, and he liked that for possible later campaign.
So
yeah, we're in trim mode. We have 700 pages, right? So we're in hard trim right now, and so we can't add too much more. Plus, if we deliver a 2-inch setting book, no one's going to want to run it, because who's got time to read 2 inches of setting material?
Well, let's tell them some now then that we might have to cut. So Dr. Jill, you just referenced a story that you and Dave have talked about. Let's tell the audience what that story is. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Which one?
Well, okay. So actually there's different stories to do with the Eye of Ra. One is the Wandering Goddess. The Wandering Goddess is, at some point in mythical history, the Eye of Ra, whichever goddess is taking on the form of the Eye of Ra in that story, which can be Hathor, Sekhmet, Tefnut in one version, the Eye of Ra gets upset and, has an argument with Ra and decides he's done. She leaves Egypt. In some versions, she goes to Nubia, becomes a very pacified Nubian cat, and is very happy. But they decide that they need her back. So different versions of the story have different gods being sent after her. For example, when it's Tefnut, then usually Shu is one of the gods sent after her, his consort, etc. And some of them also Thoth goes along, and those are the fun ones because, especially in a late version of the story, when Thoth goes along, in order to pacify her and bring her back, because once they show up, she immediately turns into a raging lioness and tries to get them the hell away. In order to pacify her, he starts telling her these stories, which are very, very much Aesop-like. I mean, literally, there's one that's The Lion and the Mouse, which is a very cute story, where a mouse saves a lion. But eventually, the point is that they pacify her, and she comes back, and there are lots and lots of wonderful festivals. And this is part of the story behind one of the festivals that actually occurred in ancient Egypt.
Okay.
So, next question.
Yep, next question, and this is a good one.
Yeah.
I've actually wondered this, Dave, and I've never asked you, so I'm glad someone asked. So we have, where did the name Keshanar come from? And I'm going to add into that, and did it have to do with ancient Egypt, or is this a Dave creation?
It's a Dave creation.
Okay.
It was an ordeal. So I invented this. I've been homebrewing this since high school, right? And so originally it was called Scandar, and then when I made the decision to publish it, I went to trademark that term so that it somebody couldn't kind of steal it off underneath of me, and so I filed the trademark application, and and somebody at my attorney's office forgot to file it. I didn't know that.
Ooh.
So I was writing along and happily going along with everything Scandar and Scandarin, right? And which is the name I picked when I was 20, and then a book came out called Scandar and the Unicorn something, right? By this young author in a youth author in Europe. I was like, oh my God, thank God I've trademarked that. I called my attorneys and they're like, oh, we forgot to file it.
Whoopsie.
And I was like, great. So then it was like, okay, come up with a new name. And so that was just colossally difficult because everything's taken and you kind of have to invent whole new words. And so the next thing I tried out was Encash. And, that just didn't have enough magic to it, ring. It just I couldn't get myself excited about it. And so then we wound up creating lists of hundreds of phonemes and like beginnings of words, middles of words, and endings of words, and then mixing them all together. And it took a year. It took a year to come up with the name. And then Keshanar was just like, when I saw it, it was like, that's the name.
That's it.
Yeah. And it means bright home.
It means bright home,
Bright home.
Etymologically, like you pulled from
No.
Egyptian roots, or how did
It's not an Egyptian word.
Right, exactly. So within the Keshan language,
Yeah. Which
Right.
is not
which
ancient
is
Egyptian.
not ancient Egyptian at
Right.
all.
Well, it's,
Cool.
maybe there's some similar the sound. No, it's just not ancient Egyptian. I'm not even going to
Okay.
go so far as to say it's similar.
All right, got it. Okay.
But there
so
is a Keshan language.
There's a Keshan language.
Yeah, it's not fully baked out, but there's words.
All right, and Keshanar means bright home.
But
in
we
it.
do use Egyptian hieroglyphics for everything. So Jill actually creates them. So we don't, I think that a lot of textures and just most hieroglyphics I think you see in art, unless they're really making an effort, are just random stuff they grab out of like the Book of the Dead or this or that or whatever, and aren't necessarily meaningful to the context. But we actually go to some links to make sure that the hieroglyphics that we use mean something, and so we've created, in fact, Jill was just gave me the final version of this today, like what is Keshanar in hieroglyphics, and she basically, I asked her opinion, she wrote me an essay. It's just fantastic,
Thank you, Jill. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great, and and so all that will go into the notes, and so we have like pages and pages about what the hieroglyphics mean. So as you go around when you see hieroglyphs in the art, for the most part, or you see them in the city, then those hieroglyphics, probably went through Dr. Waller, and she, kind of validated them. And I give her phraseology that is the sorts of things that like the Soul Corps Guard would say as their motto, or, or the Eternal Brotherhood, the Eternal Brothers, or the various different kind of factions in the city. And then she translates it.
Okay, perfect.
And so we have that sort of, that dictionary also.
That's
of
fantastic.
what all the hieroglyphs are and what they mean.
So I'm feeling
Yeah, at
that
least
all of
we
this went
will.
into intense detail.
Yeah.
Oh, you will. Okay.
We're working on it.
Working
At
on
least
it.
we will.
All right.
Not all of them have been done yet. That's on my to-do
No.
list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Getting there. Okay, so everyone, this has been so much fun. We are really close to the end. We thank you for joining us. I promised a special announcement. So that announcement is we have 2 upcoming live streams with 2 special guests. Connor Self from D8 Summit Charities is on this coming Wednesday. So that's Wednesday the 16th at 7 EST. And after that, special guest on Friday, Luke Gygax, son of Gary Gygax, has agreed to join us on Friday at 7 p.m. EST. Dave will be talking to both of those people. We're really looking forward to that. So that's your special announcement. We have just enough time for sort of closing statements, y'all. So Dr. Jill, I'm gonna start with you. Again, like I said in the beginning, we are so grateful to have you. We appreciate your hard right turn into the TTRPG gaming industry, all the way from your Egyptology PhD. Can you give me one thing you have found surprising, perhaps, or something that you found fun about incorporating your expertise on ancient Egypt into a fantasy game? Has there been something that was just surprising to you about the process of that?
I mean, honestly, my favorite part has just been working with the artists and the writers, where I have no idea what they're going to come to for me next, and I get really bored really easily. So I love having random requests of, we're making a soldier character. What did soldiers wear? Or, we're working on this spell. Are there actually any spells for this in ancient Egypt? And then I get to go dive into magical spells. So I love kind of the randomness of it.
Yeah,
I
And
love that.
and
it's
yes,
it's a fun way to actually use my knowledge.
right, and because the team is so detail oriented, right? So we like one of our art director, he'll kind of build a lot of the art, manage the direction, the creation of a lot of our art. Lady X, she has a background in ancient Egyptian and historical textiles. So she's like, they didn't have buttons, they used pins for this, and just like little details, all the way to the point where the the plants that need to be grown in order to create the textiles that they had, have to be established where in the empire that those economies evolved. Like that's the level of detail. It's crazy. But the last thing I'll say about this, because now we're running out of time,
Yep.
is that this this like commitment to authenticity and to diving into ancient Egyptian lore has been an endless source of inspiration for the campaign and for the setting. And and as has the artist actually. Every once in a while, the artist will just do something nutty, and I'll be like, "Why did you do that?" It's like, you know what? And we'll just come up with something for it, and then later it like ties in with something with actual ancient Egyptian lore. It's just been weird hair raising, raise the hair to the back of your neck kind of serendipities that have been happening, for like especially in the last couple of years as we really start to finish everything. And so that commitment to that level of detail is not pedantic. It is enriching, and it is really made for an incredible setting. So you're going to learn a lot about ancient Egypt just going through Keshanar without even realizing it or necessarily intending to learn a lot about ancient Egypt. And that's the point, right? It's
That's it.
D&D and TTRPG is experiential learning. It's a form of communal experiential learning, and and enjoyment primarily, right? But yeah, we'll definitely learn things along the way as we go.
Dave, I think that is the perfect note to end on. And that's a fantastic one. Everybody, thank you again for joining your third Keshanar Kickstarter live stream. Again, we've got one coming up on Wednesday with Connor Self from D8 Summit Charities, one coming up on Friday with Luke Gygax, son of Gary Gygax. Dr. Waller, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for being on this project. Dr. Jill Waller, our resident Egyptologist. Dave, thank you as always.
Yep.
Dave Haddon, founder of Keshanar.
Thanks everybody. Thanks
Thanks
for coming.
everyone.
Really
Appreciate your
it.
time. Bye bye now.